a state, city, or county official's misconduct. And that's just the way that the whole system works. You benefit from those things that your state benefits, and you are liable for, as a taxpayer, for those things that your state or your county or your city is liable for. So, we're going to be able to bring out the clarity that is needed. And we wonder often why we have so many reparation organizations, black reparation organizations, that are not adequately explaining to black people what reparations are, why reparations are owed, and who pays reparations. The other part of the puzzle is if a black person is part of the state as a taxpayer, the black person is also being made to pay reparations. So how can reparations be paid without blacks having to pay themselves? And so there's a lot of pieces of the initiative that will be laid out so that it can be understood and less complicated to people. But the one we did yesterday that started the whole buzz was about the different presidents. And so you had many presidents that a lot of people don't know or have chosen to forget or conveniently leave out. Is a lot of white presidents were slave owners. Either they came from slave owner families, they inherited slaves from their older family members, they were slave owners themselves, or they had interest in stock in companies that owned slaves and benefited from slave labor. So just doing research yesterday, and we're amazed at how many people, how many presidents they found that were slave owners or connected to the slave trade in some way. And so today when we talk about preachers, in order to get blacks to remain under white domination, under white control, the preachers were the main target. And so this is even before black politicians became any kind of a voting force. You had black preachers who were in charge of, several black families. And so when whites needed something done, they would go to these preachers and either convince these preachers or threaten these preachers or persuade these preachers to do what it is that white people wanted done. And, of course, the preachers themselves were doing things to spread their bloodlines kind of thing. And you had preachers who had relations with several women in the church. And many of these women would, some of these women would come up pregnant. And either, it wasn't really a big thing with black abortions in black communities back in the day. So these women would be sent down to the country or sent somewhere to have that baby, and it would be this hush-hush thing that she had this rumor that she had a child by Pastor so-and-so. And so when she had this child, it would be left there with an auntie or whoever, and it would be raised as the auntie's child. And the mother would be sent back in this, shame and degradation of having to deal with these rumors that she just had a child by the pastor. And so, but as for the child, now the child still has the same last name or takes on the last name of the auntie. if the auntie is married. But it creates a situation where should that child come to the family reunion, that child would not know the true lineage of their family. They would not know that that person is their auntie and not their mother. They would not know that the person they think is their cousin is actually their mother. And it just got really, really mixed up, really, especially from the 1910s to all the way to the 1960s. It got really crazy with all of these babies being raised as their auntie's children and being raised as the cousin to their mother instead of the child of their mother. And so that's creating we warn people that will come up. There's a lot of skeletons in black family closets that will occur, especially when you get to the church part of things. And you had a lot of uncles who would molest or have sex with their nieces, and the niece would end up pregnant, and she would have to be sent away to have the baby. And so now her child is also her cousin. And so, it's one of those things where it gets really, really complicated. And a lot of older people in your family that you're going to find just will not open up those closets. Those things, many of them, they vow to take to their grave. And they are not going to want to talk about whose child is really whose child. And they will get upset that you're stirring things up. You're stirring up old ghosts and old rivalries or whatever. But in order to properly do these charts, you're going to have that people, are not quite proud of. And so the main thing to remember is that anytime a child is born, anywhere, anytime a child is born, someone is responsible for naming that child and having some kind of record of that child being born. So you think about, a child being born in a outskirts African village, and you say, well, there's no records department, there's no county clerk, there's no, person to record that birth. But remember that mother gives that child a name, and that name is the name that child's siblings know. So even if that child is not recorded on paper, that child is recorded in memory. And so everybody that knows that child knows of that birth. Everybody that knows that child's mother knows that child's maternal lineage. And, anyone who may know that child's father also knows that child's paternal lineage, and so on and so on and so forth. So it becomes more difficult once you cross the oceans, because like the slave masters, the white slave masters here on the northern continent in the 1600s, 1700s, the record keeping in many places is not very good. You have to go by who knows who and sort of make your own chart from talking to people. And it gets a little bit more, and you have to be more of an investigator when you get to places where the record keeping is not so good. But for those that we're dealing with on the northern continent, even back when you start getting back in the 1600s, 1500s, 1400s, you have to remember that every slave born belonged to some white family as far as the records are concerned.